After discovering that my boyfriend's ex had sent him explicit photos, I confronted him, only to unravel the heartbreaking truth that he'd been cheating on me for our entire relationship. My boyfriend, let's call him Ethan, has this podcast that he's been working on for what feels like forever. To him, it's more than just a passion project. It's his ticket to something bigger, a way to make a name for himself and share his thoughts with the world. Honestly, I've always admired his drive. Seeing him pour his heart and soul into something that started as just a little side project was inspiring. And in the beginning, I was right there with him. I was his co-host, his biggest supporter, and the one who helped shape the show. We'd spend hours recording episodes late into the night, laughing at our mistakes, and bonding over inside jokes that would make it into the podcast, much to our listeners' delight. But life has a funny way of shifting priorities. My job got demanding, and I had to pull back. It wasn't easy, stepping away from something that I helped build. I felt like I was letting him down, like I wasn't living up to the role of the supportive partner. Ethan assured me that he understood, that he'd hold down the fort while I focused on my career, which was paying most of our bills since the podcast wasn't bringing in enough to sustain us. He was sweet about it, always telling me that the door was open for me to return whenever I had the time. As much as I trusted Ethan, the distance grew between us. I felt like we were living two separate lives under the same roof, mine filled with deadlines and work pressure, his centered around his dream that seemed to be taking flight. One night, after another long day at the office, Ethan casually mentioned that he found a new co-host to take over my spot when I wasn't available. He said her name was Zoe, and he pulled up her Instagram profile for me to see. Scrolling through Zoe's pictures, I couldn't help but notice how effortlessly beautiful she was. She looked like she had just stepped out of a lifestyle blog, perfect hair, perfect smile, the kind of person who seemed like she had it all together. I pushed aside the tiny sting of insecurity I felt because I trusted Ethan, and he hadn't given me any reason to doubt him. Yet. I even told him it was great that he found someone to fill the gap when I couldn't be there. In hindsight, that was probably my first mistake, being too trusting, too naive to think that nothing could go wrong. Fast forward a week later. We were out to dinner with our friends and everyone was in high spirits. I remember laughing at a joke my friend Emily made when, out of nowhere, Ethan's best friend Liam casually said, "I'm really impressed at how you're handling Ethan working with Zoe again, especially since they used to hook up." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room, and I could see everyone's eyes dart between me and Ethan, waiting for my reaction. Ethan's face turned ghost white. I could tell from the way he looked at me that he was silently begging me not to react, to just let it slide until we were alone. But how could I? I felt humiliated, blindsided, like the last person in the room to be in on a joke. I had to force a tight smile and play it cool for the sake of saving face in front of our friends. But inside, I was burning with a mix of betrayal and confusion. The evening was a blur after that. I barely tasted my food and I couldn't focus on the conversations around me. The second we got home, I turned to Ethan and said, "What the hell, Ethan? You need to tell me everything about Zoe, now." He tried to brush it off at first, telling me that it was no big deal, that Zoe was just a fling from before we met. He said they had a friends with benefits situation a long time ago, but ended it because he wanted a serious relationship and she didn't. He claimed that it was ancient history, nothing to worry about. But the way he avoided my eyes told me he was still hiding something. "You should have told me," I said, my voice trembling with anger and disbelief. "Why did you lie about who she was? You said she was just someone from your study group, not someone you used to hook up with." Ethan opened his mouth, but for a moment, nothing came out. He finally muttered, "I didn't want you to get upset. I know how you overthink things, and I thought you'd just worry for no reason." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Worry for no reason? You decided for me what I could handle instead of being honest? I felt like my trust in him was evaporating before my very eyes. The Ethan I thought I knew wouldn't lie to my face like that, wouldn't hide things that were so important. I told him that I wasn't comfortable with him continuing to work with Zoe on the podcast. It wasn't about her being an ex-fling anymore. It was about the lie, the secrecy, the choice he made to keep me in the dark. Ethan agreed to drop Zoe from the podcast, but his mood shifted entirely after that. It was like he blamed me for making him cut ties. like he was punishing me with his cold silence. The atmosphere in our apartment changed. It went from feeling like a home to feeling like I was living with a stranger. I could sense that the distance between us was growing wider, and I didn't know how to bridge the gap. Days passed, and the silent treatment continued. Our friend group was divided on the whole thing. Some of them said I was overreacting, that Ethan made an innocent mistake and didn't mean to hurt me. They said I should cut him some slack because he didn't want to see me spiral. But others told me that I was right to feel betrayed, that Ethan's behavior was shady and disrespectful, and that I should trust my gut. It wasn't long after that when Ethan finally dropped the real bombshell. We were sitting on the couch in our living room, our cat curled up between us like some kind of emotional buffer, when he turned to me and said, "There's something else I need to tell you." He was staring at his hands like they held all the answers, but all I saw were his knuckles turning white from how hard he was clenching them. "She sent me nudes," he said, the words hanging in the air like a dark cloud. My heart stopped. "What did you say to her?" I demanded, my voice barely more than a whisper. Ethan looked like he'd rather be anywhere but in that room with me. He finally showed me the messages that were only 2 days old. Zoe had sent him explicit photos, and his only response was, "I'm flattered, but I have a girlfriend." He didn't block her. He didn't tell me. He just kept it to himself like it was no big deal. My mind was racing, and I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. "You should have told me the second she did that," I yelled. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you even respond?" Ethan just sat there, silent, as if he was searching for the right words to make it all better. His excuse? He said he didn't want to make things awkward with his friends, that Zoe was part of the larger group, and he didn't want to create drama. I lost it. Awkward for your friends? What about me, Ethan? What about how I feel? I'm your girlfriend. What if one of my guy friends sent me nudes? Would you be okay with that? That got to him. He looked down, finally realizing the mess he'd made. He nodded and, with me watching, blocked Zoe's number and deleted her contact. But it didn't feel like a victory. It didn't feel like I'd won anything at all. I felt more defeated than ever. His lies had cut me so deep that even blocking her couldn't heal the wound he'd left. He tried to reach out, to hold me, to apologize, but I pulled away. I needed space. I needed time to think about whether this relationship was something I could ever truly trust again. Right now, I'm staying at my best friend's house, our cat perched on my lap as I try to figure out what to do next. I never thought I'd be in this position, questioning everything I thought I knew about the man I wanted to marry. Ethan has been calling and texting, begging me to come home, saying he's sorry, that he never meant to hurt me, that he loves me more than anything. But all I can think about is how easily he hid things from me, how he decided what I should or shouldn't know. He cried when I told him I needed space, really cried. Tears streaming down his face, the kind of tears I've only seen him shed once before when his mom passed away. He kept saying he's terrified of losing me, that he'd do anything to make this right. But can I really just sweep this under the rug and pretend everything is okay? Can I ever trust him again? I don't know what to do. I don't know if I should believe in the love we shared, or if I should walk away to save myself from more heartache down the road. Right now, all I know is that the man I thought I could spend my life with is now a stranger, someone I'm not sure I can ever look at the same way again. And no matter how much he cries, no matter how much he apologizes, I'm not sure it will ever be enough to fix what's broken between us. I'll try to update you all as I figure things out, but I could really use your advice right now. Is this relationship salvageable, or am I fooling myself into believing that love can conquer this kind of betrayal? Story 2. When my best friend's mom showed up claiming my husband was the father of her grandchild, I thought my world was shattered, until I uncovered a truth that turned everything upside down. I'm at a loss for where to even begin. The past 6 months have been a whirlwind of pain, confusion, and betrayal, and every time I think I've reached the bottom, it somehow gets worse. My best friend since elementary school, let's call her Laura, passed away in February after a long battle with cancer. She left behind her 2-year-old daughter, who is now being taken care of by Laura's mom, Sarah. Just when I thought the worst was behind me, last month Sarah showed up unannounced at our doorstep, demanding that my husband David take responsibility for his supposed daughter. She claimed that Laura had confided in her before she died, revealing that David was the father but had never been told because Laura didn't want to disrupt our lives. She accused David of avoiding his responsibilities and said it was time for him to either take custody of the child or start paying child support. My world, which had already been rocked by losing Laura, suddenly felt like it was crumbling all over again. The moment Sarah laid all of this on us, David went into a full-blown panic attack, the likes of which I'd never seen. I had to end the conversation with Sarah just to get him to calm down. His reaction left me shaken because I've never seen him so completely overwhelmed and terrified. When David finally managed to gather himself, he told me his side of the story, but honestly, it left me with more questions than answers. He said that there was a possibility that Laura's daughter was his child, but the circumstances weren't as straightforward as I might think. According to David, nearly 3 years ago, during a housewarming party at our place, something happened between him and Laura. I had been called into work that night, leaving him to host the party on his own. I didn't get back until around 3 a.m., by which time the party had wound down, and David was passed out upstairs while Laura had already left. I remember thinking it was odd that she'd left without saying goodbye since we hadn't seen each other in months, but I brushed it off at the time. Little did I know that moment would come back to haunt me. David confessed that he woke up in the middle of that night to find Laura on top of him. He claimed he was still groggy and disoriented from the alcohol, barely able to process what was happening before passing out again. He said he never told me about it, because he was terrified I wouldn't believe him, that I'd think he cheated on me willingly. He even showed me text messages he'd sent to his best friend the next day, asking for advice because he believed he might have been sexually assaulted. But the texts were vague, never mentioning Laura's name directly, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he could have fabricated the conversation to cover his tracks if he was guilty. I didn't know what to believe, whether Laura, the friend I'd trusted with my deepest secrets, had taken advantage of my husband, or if David was lying to save himself. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Laura never seemed interested in David. In fact, she always hinted that I could do better, that I deserved someone who matched my ambitions. She was fiercely protective of me, so why would she have an affair with him? If there really was something between them, why wouldn't she have told me when she knew she was dying? When we spent those long, painful days talking about everything and anything as she lay in that hospital bed, I confronted David, demanding he get a DNA test done to clear up this mess once and for all. But until we knew the truth, I asked him to move out. I told him I needed space, time to think, to wrap my head around this nightmare without his presence clouding my judgment. In that moment, I felt like I was losing not only my best friend all over again, but also my husband, the man I thought I knew better than anyone. As I went over our past interactions with Laura in my mind, I began to notice the small things that I'd previously overlooked, like how after her daughter was born, Laura asked once where David was when she visited, but then never inquired about him again. It struck me as odd that someone who supposedly had an affair with my husband would avoid him so completely. Was that guilt, or was it something more sinister? I thought back to all the times Laura hinted that I could do better than David. If there had really been an affair, I felt like she would have used that knowledge as leverage, especially during those vulnerable end-of-life conversations we had. The fact that she took this secret to her grave spoke volumes. And then there were David's habits. He's not a heavy drinker, hardly ever drinks more than a couple of beers even at parties, and his job keeps him on a tight schedule. He rarely overindulges. That night at the housewarming, he was simply trying to unwind with friends. It's entirely possible that he did drink more than he usually does, fell asleep, and woke up in a foggy haze to a nightmare he couldn't fully comprehend. After thinking long and hard and reading your comments, I came to a realization that shook me to my core. The signs were all pointing to the same conclusion. Laura had indeed taken advantage of my husband while he was incapacitated. She raped him. It was a truth that I didn't want to accept, but I couldn't ignore the evidence staring me in the face. When I asked David to leave, I thought I was doing what I needed to process my grief and confusion. But now I realized that I'd pushed away a man who might have been a victim, someone who was suffering in silence and didn't know how to tell me the truth. My actions were cold and thoughtless, driven by my own pain and disbelief. I forgot that he needed my support, not my suspicion, I called David and apologized, my voice breaking as I begged him to come home. I told him that I believed him, that I understood he was telling the truth, and I was so sorry for not being there for him when he needed me the most. David is coming home tonight, and I know that from this point forward, we will face this nightmare together. As I sit here waiting for David to walk through that door, I feel a mix of grief, guilt, and an anger I can't quite shake. Laura was my best friend. She sat in my home, at my table, playing with my emotions like it was some twisted game. She brought her daughter here, knowing full well the torment she was putting David through every single time she walked through that door. How could she have done that to him, to me, to our lives? We have a long road ahead of us, and I know it won't be easy. Therapy is on the horizon for both of us. And there's still the question of Laura's daughter, who might be David's biological child. We'll have to navigate that path carefully, with the compassion that an innocent child deserves, even if her existence stems from the darkest betrayal I could imagine. I've realized that sometimes the people we think we know best are capable of things that shatter our very understanding of loyalty, love, and friendship. As for David, he's not just my husband, he's my partner in this fight against the pain that Laura left behind. And I know that if the roles were reversed, he would do the same for me without a second thought. To everyone who read my story, offered advice, and helped me see the truth, thank you. I might have made terrible mistakes in handling this, but your insights gave me the clarity I desperately needed. Now my focus is on healing the wound Laura left in our lives and rebuilding the trust that was shaken but not destroyed. If anyone has ideas on how to help David heal from this, or suggestions on how to approach the situation with the little girl, I'm all ears. This is the hardest battle we've ever faced, but at least now we're facing it together. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed our stories and would like to hear more, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you captivating tales and new content every week. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. We appreciate every one of you for being a part of our storytelling journey.